My name is Linnea Anderson on behalf of the First Fridays Committee and the Archives and Special Collections Department. Welcome to First Fridays. This season's theme is sensory experiences. We are exploring the things that you can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell in archives and special collections. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former library director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the university libraries, archives, and special collections. A special thank you to the interpreters from Middle English who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentations. And if time allows, we will have a question and answer session at the end. Audience online, if you have any questions for our speaker today, please submit them using the Q&A function and not the chat so that we can keep track of your questions. And in-person audience, please hold your questions until the end. We are not having a tour today, so we apologize for those of you who were looking forward to that, but we encourage you to come back next month and take advantage of that opportunity. And at this point in the program, we will pause for a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota peoples. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen relations with tribal nations. We've also acknowledged that words are not enough, and that we must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for Native American students, staff, faculty, and community members. So our presentations today feature the Givens Collection of African American Literature and Life and the James Ford Bell Library. And our first presentation is Black American Image, presented by Davu Underwood Seru, curator of the Givens Collection of African American Literature and Life. Looks can be deceiving. The other senses can too, but somewhere in the American imagination between attraction and aversion stands Black people. This presentation of materials from the Givens Collection of African American Literature and Life will explore connections between poetry, poetic imagery, synesthesia, and racial identity.
Where's Cheryl? Is Cheryl down here yet? No. Cheryl's being called. I just want to make sure that she can hear me. If Cheryl can hear me, everybody. Okay, welcome everybody. Trying to advance my slide. That's just not working. Nope. Sorry about that. As this gets sorted out, we'll mention that I'm the curator of the Givens Collection. And this year we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Givens Collection. Thank you. Having come to the University of Minnesota Libraries. Oh, I'm wrong. I haven't been brought. It didn't just show up on its own. It was brought by people to us. If you have a moment after these presentations, I invite you to visit the exhibit across the hall, The Circle Unbroken, celebrating 40 years of community stewardship in the Givens Collection. Just across the way in the first floor gallery, it'll be up through January. January 30th is when we start taking it down. But that exhibit includes archival materials on the collection's founding and that document its activities. These materials are being shown for the first time. Included also our highlight rare books and manuscripts from the collection and archival objects that illustrate how it has been used, including works by authors who have used it. For those of you who don't know, Givens Collection of African American Literature and Life includes novels, poetry, plays, short stories, essays, literary criticism, periodicals, and biographies that span 252 years of American history. and culture. It has a particular strength in the areas of the Harlem Renaissance, which I'll be talking about a bit today, and the Black Arts Movement. The collection also holds a significant number of books that relate to African-American art, education, social sciences, sports, and entertainment, which I'll be talking about today, as well as works by or about continental Africans and Africans in diaspora. With tens of thousands of archival and manuscript materials that document the history of Black literature and culture, including correspondences, pamphlets, screenplays, newspaper clippings, photographs, sheet music, and ephemera, the Gibbons Collection is an invaluable community and scholarly resource. I, though, am here today to offer some of what the Gibbons Collection can tell us about looking and being looked at. Moreover, the collection bears witness itself to a sense of self that exceeds the limitations of these Black bodies. First, the preamble. In a recent newspaper article from MidPost titled "Eyes on the Street," is only one part of the urban crime solution. The writer states that crime is one of those topics about which it is difficult to resolve a disagreement because each person's individual experience is a trump card. You can try citing data or trends, but if the other person replies, "Yes, but my sister was mugged last week," that's the end of the discussion. Personal feelings carry a lot of weight, and perception is often a self-fulfilling prophecy that shapes our behavior. In my experience, the writer continues, a large portion of what people mean when they complain about crime in 2025 is the presence of visible poverty and drug addiction. There's a pattern. The more people can use urban spaces, the safer and more policed they become, even though cops have nothing to do with the process. That said, eyes on the street doesn't really solve the problems at the core of people's concerns. Even if some parts of the city are improving, immiseration and housing instability is trending in the opposite direction, thanks to larger forces in our country. People with nowhere to go will find somewhere else and on some other street, as well they should. I often take the light rail, the Green Line, from downtown St. Paul to campus. I did today. And I'm familiar with at least the sights, smells, and sounds of desperate outlaws. It's quite the spectacle. And for reasons explained by overwhelming data on racial inequities, the image is often that of Black folks. And Blackness is a fact that has a central place in the current discourse on crime in democratic-led cities. I'm reminded of the 1968 Kerner Commission report, or a report of the National Advisory Commission of Civil Disorders. I'm reminded of the televised Vietnam War, even though I wasn't around yet. Anti-war demonstrations, even though I wasn't around yet. Ghetto rebellions, which my family participated in. A flight to the suburbs. And what people witnessing from outside of cities will come to think of as life within for the first time, thanks to television. Many African cultures believe that time is more like a succession of circles than a line from here to there. Poet Amiri Baraka called that the changing same. Look, in his theory of the linear evolution of bipedalism, Charles Darwin argues that man could not have attained his present dominant position in the world without the use of hands, which are so admirably adapted to act in obedience to his will. But the hands and arms could hardly have become perfect enough to have manufactured weapons or to have hurled stones and spears with a true aim, as long as they were habitually used for locomotion and for supporting the whole weight of the body, or as before remarked, so long as they were especially fitted for climbing trees. If it be an advantage to man to stand firm on his feet and to have his hands and arms free, of which, from his preeminent success in the battle of life, there can be no doubt, then I can see no reason why it should not have been advantageous to the progenitors of man to have become more and more erect or bipedal. Furthermore, the evolution of bipedalism, as much as it also led to the development of tools, right, is intertwined with the evolution of vision, sight. We stand, we see threats from a distance coming along the horizon, and our hands are crafty. We can keep those threats over there with tools, right? Key effects of bipedalism in vision include expanded field of vision, predator avoidance, resource location, navigation, enhanced visual processing, hands-free manipulation and visually guided tasks, as Darwin says, and social and behavioral visual signals. In other words, as they stood, our ancestors would develop tools to keep threats seen from a distance, at a distance, ensuring their relative safety. But what can happen when what we sense and what we can know don't line up? Furthermore, what does the discourse on race developing within African American literary and cultural traditions tell us about sensing and knowing? Please don't try to read all that. I'll read it to you. In his 1845 autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, Douglass recalls being within the interpretive circle, but too young and, as a house slave, too privileged to know the meaning of what he was witnessing among the enslaved and those enslaved to the field. Quote, I did not, when a slave, understand the deep meaning of those rude and apparently incoherent songs. I was myself within the circle, so that I neither saw nor heard as those without might see or hear. They told of a tale of woe, which was then altogether beyond my feeble comprehension. They were tones loud, long, and deep. They breathed the prayer and complaint of souls, boiling over with the bitterest anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains. The hearing of those wild notes always depressed my spirit and filled me with ineffable sadness. I have frequently found myself in tears while hearing them. The mere recurrence to those songs even now afflicts me, and while I'm writing these lines, an expression of feeling has already found its way down my cheek. To those songs, I trace my first glimmering conception of the dehumanizing character of slavery. I can never get rid of that conception. Songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery and quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds. If anyone wishes to be impressed with the soul-killing effects of slavery, let him go to Colonel Lloyd's plantation and on allowance day, place himself in the deep pine woods, and there let him in silence analyze the sounds that shall pass through the chambers of his soul. And if he is not thus impressed, it will only be because, quote, there is no flesh in his obdurate heart, end quote. Douglass's prose serves the rhetoric of abolitionism. It demonstrates humility as it calls the reader to confirm that their humanity has substance. The sentence that closes the paragraph draws its final image and metaphor from William Cowper's 1784 poem, The Task, pointing figuratively and by material implication to the quality of the soul or conscience of the reader. Douglass's purpose being for the reader to bear witness, to choose empathy. Poetic imagery might be described as those uses of language in a literary work that invoke sense impressions by literal or figurative reference to perceptible or concrete objects, scenes, actions, or states, as distinct from the language of abstract argument or exposition. The imagery of a literary work thus comprises the set of images that it uses. These need not be mental pictures, but may appeal to senses other than sight. Douglass's rhetoric is the language of abstract argument. I'd like to draw your attention to some objects from the Gibbons collection, like Douglass's work, that allow for a poetic frame of reference to the matters of sensing and race. Take this example from Connie Cullen's Ballad of the Brown Girl, a tragic poem about interracial love, framed as a dialogue between Lord Thomas and his mother. Oh, love is good, the lady quoth, when berries ripe and sweet, from every bush and weighted vine are crying, take and eat. But what is best when winter comes is gold and silver bright. Go bring me home the nut brown maid and leave the lily white. Cullen continues, the brown girl came to him as might, a queen to take her crown. With gems her fingers flamed and flared, her robe was weighted down. Her hair was black as sin is black, and ringed about with fire. Her eyes were black as night is black, when moon and stars conspire. Her mouth was one red cherry clipped, in twain her voice a lyre. Poet Claudia Rankine coined the term the racial imaginary to describe the collective, culturally constructed set of ideas, beliefs, and images about race that influence how individuals and societies understand and experience race, even though race itself is an invented concept. The imagery used in Cullen's 1927 poem, his poem that emerged during the Renaissance, Nut Brown and Lily White to refer to skin color, reflects an aesthetic preoccupation with color that was typical of the era of the Harlem or New Negro Renaissance, which lasted from about 1918 to 1938. While her brown skin is idealized, the girl dies tragically, and therefore the love object remains elusive. No marriage, no sunny resolution. Prior to the New Negro Renaissance, most of what was published about Black people or Black life was written by white writers and was often filled with racist imagery. And this writing was a part of a tradition that went back to stage performances of blackface minstrelsy and the melodrama of the domestic novel. A central character was that of the tragic mulatto, a mixed race character whose fate was doomed due to the irreconcilable conflict in their bloodlines. The fair-skinned characters would often try to escape this conflict by passing for white, by appearing to not be a problem. But alas, these characters would often die of too much mental anguish. Absent a literal death, narratives featuring tragic mulattoes would also find tragedy in the act of passing itself. In James Weldon Johnson's 1927 novel, pictured here on the right, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, the protagonist compares his decision to pass for white with trading his birthright, quote, for a mess of pottage. The tragic beauty of the brown girl in Cullen's poem and passing figure is reflected in the passing figure in Johnson is reflected in yet another exemplified here by an advertisement of hair straightening and skin lightening products sold to Black women by Madam C.J. Walker, a Black woman herself. But passing did not only disturb the consciousness of the mixed race character caught between worlds. For evidence of this, that passing did not only affect the person passing, we might simply point to anti-miscegenation laws and the one-drop rule, both meant to determine in perpetuity who could be a slave and who could be free. Thus, a crisis in meaning ensues when a character risks crossing the racial boundary. The crisis produces an anxiety, which might be foundational to and part and parcel of this racial imaginary that Rankins mentions. See the heroic treatment of the KKK in D.W. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation, a film that is obsessed with the theme of race mixing and is based on the novel shown here with the Salt and Pepper Shakers cast as nostalgic antebellum stereotypes, but which were produced, the Salt and Pepper Shakers, during the Jim Crow era in order to enforce racial obedience through imagery. Even abolitionists, right, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, could hardly imagine a role for Blacks in America other than that of the servant. Servants were content with their lot in life, absent politics and critical consciousness, and therefore little threat to the racial imaginary. Servants were, for a time, the Black American image. Paul Laurence Dunbar's 1895 poem, We Wear the Mask, reveals an understanding of the shared dangers that Black Americans face, confronted by a gaze whose privilege is oblivious and which might know us, confronted by a gaze whose privilege is obliviousness, that is the privilege, and which might know us to death. At once, he asks and answers his reader, his onlooker, why should the world be overwise and counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. In his great work, The Souls of Black Folk from 1903, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois found potential agency in mastering the gaze of the other and in affirming what transcendent beauty emerges from behind the veil of race. Two helpful ideas emerge from this book, the theory of double consciousness and his analysis of the sorrow songs. For our purposes, they recall the scene from Frederick Douglass's narrative, and they merge sight and sound. This is what Du Bois says about double consciousness. It is peculiar. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And about the sorrow songs, what are these songs and what do they mean? I know little of music and can say nothing in technical phrase, but I know something of men. And knowing them, I know that these songs are the articulate message of the slave to the world. They tell us in these eager days that life was joyous in the black slave, careless and happy. I can easily believe this of some, of many, but not all the past South, though it rose from the dead, can gainsay the heart-touching witness of these songs. They are the music of an unhappy people, of the children of disappointment. They tell of death and suffering and unvoiced longing toward a truer world of misty wanderings and hidden ways. I think it's interesting here on the right, you see a page from the first chapter on our spiritual strivings. Each chapter of the Souls of Black Folk begins with an epigraph in English, lines of English verse, and then a sheet music, a bar at least, of some melody that, unless you read music, remains elusive to you. But these melodies are derived from the sorrow songs, Black spirituals that come up out of slavery. In Du Bois's work, Black bodies are invested with a soul and what he calls second sight, a synthesis of points of view that grants the Black American subject special equipment for navigating the color line. It is unlike the passing figure who seeks acceptance within the gaze of nefarious characters. The new Negro, who wields second sight, might escape a tragic fate by learning the substance of one's own soul and taking up the work of racial uplift. Synesthesia was mentioned in the introduction, and so I got to describe it more in detail here. It's described as a sensory experience elicited by a stimulus in a different sensory modality, as when particular sounds evoke sensations of color. I'll close this talk by offering something about the image that I used to advertise it. The book cover from Mahalia Jackson, Cook Soul. Look, the cover features a portrait in black and white of the great gospel singer, joyfully intoning above a title, which, in its use of the verb to cook, signifies at least two things: the general sense of making or creating something, and the literal task of cooking. The object is soul, a quality of being born into difficult circumstances, and which, in African American cultural traditions, requires expression. The inner book jacket tells us that Mahalia Jackson Cook Soul, 1970, is more than a guide to the preparation of favorite family dishes. It is a completely unique collection of traditional recipes from Black Southern America. The book's famous author describes soul food as the dishes that have been transferred from inexpensive cuts of meat or vegetables into delicious, nutritious meals with the use of herbs, spices, and a lot of soul. It's as if the sound of her Black voice, carried by a smile here on the cover, elicits the smells and tastes of a Black soul, rendering meaning out of what might appear to be meaningless, cooking poetry out of poverty, the meaning of which is recognizable to those within her circle. It is the racial imaginary, aware of its own double consciousness and wholesome commitment to people. The role Jackson assumes reflects the traditional role of Black women as domestic servants, but with pride in the cultural achievements of a humble people. And it is beautiful, synesthetic, a beautiful synesthetic example that stands opposite the binary thinking and acting that shows up in the development of race matters in America. I plan to take the train home today, back to St. Paul, back downtown. Some might regard it as common sense to keep your eyes and ears out for the streets, for the threats in these streets. I do. But this tradition of writing about the condition of seeing and hearing that I've been talking about being looked at and listened to, about not being thought to have a soul, what this tradition teaches us is that common sense is relative. Yes, our most fit ancestors stood upright. They identified threats at a distance, developed tools to keep themselves safe, but didn't have the time or wherewithal to attend to the anxiety and confusion that kept them in a kind of survival mode that narrowed the field of their interactions to violence, striking out against the object that scared you. Thank goodness some of them went beyond common sense and cooked up art. And thank you for listening.
The second presentation is The Resonating Power of Music in the Pre-Modern World, presented by Ann Good, Assistant Curator of the James Ford Bell Library, and Anya Baldal-Davu, curatorial intern and PhD candidate in historical ethnomusicology. And music is often described as having the power to draw together people from across cultures. And as European travelers began exploring the world, they wrote about the cultural activities of the peoples that they encountered. And this presentation will examine some of the music and musical instruments documented in the Bell collection and consider how music from around the world resonates across time and space.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ann Good, and I'm the Assistant Curator of the James Ford Bell Library. For those of you who don't know, our collection was founded in 1953 by James Ford Bell, who was the founder of General Mills, as well as a longtime regent of the University of Minnesota. As a successful businessman, Mr. Bell was particularly interested in the history of trade worldwide. The collection that he started with 600 rare books, approximately, rare books and maps, has continued to grow over the last 70 years to some 40,000 items, including, let me see, I need to advance, yes, including books, maps, manuscripts, and archival materials, as well as smaller printed works. These materials document the history and impact of trade and cultural exchange worldwide before about 1825. So our presentation today focuses on sound as a sensory experience, and specifically, we're going to introduce and highlight some parts of the exhibit currently on display in the Bell Gallery, entitled The Resonating Power of Music in the Pre-Modern World. The exhibit explores the role of music and music making as a vital medium of cultural encounter in the early modern world. As European travelers and merchants expanded their reach across Asia, Oceania, Africa, and the Americas, they encountered soundscapes that challenged familiar categories of understanding. Their manuscripts, maps, and illustrated volumes, preserved in the Bell collection, attest not only to practical matters like navigation or trade practices, but also to ethnographic curiosity and the interpretive frameworks through which they sought to make sense of unfamiliar sonic and performative traditions. So my co-curator and curatorial intern for this exhibit is Anya Baldal-Davu, who's a PhD candidate in historical ethnomusicology. Anya's internship was funded through a strategic initiative grant awarded to the Bell Library by Dean Lisa German, for which we are very grateful. Anya was the perfect person for this internship. Her expertise in music and ethnomusicology complemented my expertise in early modern travel accounts. And moreover, she grew up in Iran, and her unique perspective and her instinct to always push back against narratives dominated by European voices definitely enriched the exhibit and made it more complex and nuanced. So I'm going to just scroll through some slides here, and then Anya will do more in detail. When we first started working on the concept of an exhibit focused on music about 2 years ago, we started bouncing this idea back and forth. We were actually not sure if we'd be able to find enough in the Bell collection to fill all of the exhibit cases. There are about 9 cases, so we were looking for about 40 books. So one of the first revelations of this work has been the sheer number of European writers of travel accounts who also comment on musical encounters. we could have easily filled twice as many cases. Of course, some writers are cursory and dismissive, while others write in detail, describing performances and instruments, and sometimes attempting to record music from other cultures with European musical notation. So typically, these travelers are also the ones whose books are illustrated with images of musical instruments and cultural observances in which dance and music played a role. In popular culture today, I believe that we have a feel-good notion that music is a universal language and that music has the power to bring people together. Although music certainly has the power to move emotions, even today, when recordings and videos of all kinds of music from all over the world are readily available, so even today, with all of this familiarity, music often does not bring people together. In the pre-modern world, when cross-cultural musical encounters were sometimes entirely new, no one believed that music could be a universal language. Often European descriptions of other people's music was used to categorize them on the spectrum of civilized versus primitive. Nevertheless, descriptions of musical encounters in this period contributed to richer engagement with concepts of universality versus relativism. In our exhibit, then, we attempted to group material roughly by geographic regions, although we don't claim that we covered the whole world. In each case, we tried to include images of musical instruments, songs, and/or descriptions of musical practices, and musical annotation. We aimed for a rich and eclectic mixture, beginning in the European Middle Ages and then flowing out into the rest of the world to roughly 1800 CE. We chose 56 items, including some musical instruments. And obviously, it won't be possible to tell you about each of these things. So Anya is going to highlight a selection focusing on musicking in the Middle East. Anya.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Resonating Power of Music in the Pre-Modern World, an exhibit that explores how sound and music served as bridges between cultures long before our modern concept of globalization. As European travelers, merchants, and missionaries began exploring their presence across Asia, Africa, and Middle East, from the 16th century onwards, they entered sound worlds that were unlike anything they had heard before. What they brought with themselves, beyond ships, instruments, and curiosity, was their own style and system of hearing, a framework shaped by tonal organization, notation, and aesthetics of European classical music. So when these travelers heard new instruments or musical scales, they didn't conform to their tonal expectations, like microtones in Arabic music, the pentatonic scales of East Asian music, or rhythmic cycles in Hindustani music. They often perceived them through a comparative or even a hierarchical lens. What didn't align with Western harmony was often described as exotic, irregular, or out of tune, even when it reflected a sophisticated musical system. European interest in the musical traditions of the Middle East intensified during the 17th and 18th centuries as travelers, diplomats, and physicians recorded their encounters with the soundscape of Ottoman and the Safavid empires. Manuscripts such as Alexander Russell, The Natural History of Aleppo, provide detailed descriptions of local ensembles, capturing performances that features instruments like the rig, ney, tambour, kamanche, and naqare, which we'll be discussing in detail later in the presentation. The circulation of instruments and musical ideas across the Middle East was centuries old by the time Russell's observations. Persian miniatures, paintings in a poetic manuscript of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh and Nizami's Khamseh showcase earlier references to the symbolic and social power of, music in Persian culture. Instruments like the barbat, oud, chang, and the kamanche appear not merely as tools of performance, but as emblems of refinement and emotion. By the 17th century, travelers such as Kampfer extended this network of observation eastward, documenting musical practices across the Ottoman territories and into Safavid Persia. The engraving of musical instruments echoes illustrations that appear in other manuscripts, visually linking the diverse soundscape of the region. Together, these manuscripts chart the movement of instruments, styles, and meanings across imperial boundaries, revealing a world in which sound was as mobile and interconnected as trade, poetry, and art. Now, by looking through the prism of cultural and intellectual exchange in the region, let us revisit the ensemble in Aleppo. While geographically we are in what is modern-day Syria, it is important to remember that during this period, the region was under Ottoman rule. The music of the time, therefore, reflects Ottoman Turkish sensibilities and aesthetic preferences. The instruments depicted here are not exclusive to Turkish music, but belong to a broader sound world shared across the Arab and Persianate traditions. The image features the rig, tambour, ney, kamanche, and naqare. Starting with the rig is a type of frame drum similar to a tambourine, which is still widely associated with Arabic music. I'm going to play. There we are. Another frame drum popular in the region is daf. It is one of the instruments often used by the Sufi musicians in the Middle East. Other than the obvious size difference between the two drums, the lack of cymbals on the outer edge of the daf is counteracted by more than 20 jingles installed within the inner rim. And here is, I keep losing the. The tambour, a long neck, pear-shaped lute, appears across all three traditions, though its tuning and timbre vary according to each musical style. The video that I'm going to share for this one is actually from the Kurdish tradition within Iran. So it might be different if you listen to Kurdish music in the Turkish region or Syrian or Iraqi for that matter. So here we go.
Your personal finances
Oh,
start
God.
with you,
Yeah,
but they support your entire home
so
team.
sorry.
With Thrivent, your money can be a force for good for the people, causes, and communities you're most thankful for. Thrivent, where money means more.
Uh, The ney is an end-blown flute, which is found in many traditions across the region. Again, the example that I'm playing for you is a Persian style ney. The melodic contour would sound very different if it's an Arab ney or a Turkish one for that matter.
Between Molly leaving and Mom's osteoporosis, I thought life was gonna slow down. Boy, was I wrong.
So they actually will anchor it on their teeth. Some would break their teeth, so it would like stick and hold. So that's why he had like a weird kind of hold on the instrument, because that's what they do when they want to play it. So this is again an instrument that is often paired with a daf, especially if it's a Sufi setting. This is not a Sufi setting. We are going to look at a Sufi setting as well, but this is just a duet between ney and a daf. Let's hope it doesn't have an ad again. So as I mentioned, these are used in the Sufi tradition, and this is a very good example that we have also included in the exhibition downstairs, which depicts, and if you look very closely on the top corner, you can see the musicians as the whirling dervishes are getting into their, please don't have an ad. that fast. The Comanche, also known as a rebec, is a spiked fiddle found in this region. The style of the Comanche, typically used in Iran, has a rounded sound box covered with animal skin. But there are certain variations that have more a canonical sound box, altering the instrument's resonance and sustaining power of the note. So the example that we're going to look at is a Turkish one. They also have a smaller version of Comanche that doesn't look anything like the Persian Comanche, but they still call it a Comanche. But the one that we're looking at is the Turkish Comanche, or Rebbe.
Take the next step in treating your moderate to severe ulcerative colitis with Entyvio, the only gut-focused.
This is a Persian style Comanche. As you can see, the neck of the instrument is considerably shorter than the other one. And in this particular clip, the Comanche is accompanied by a tombak, which is a goblet drum that is used in the region. And the last instrument from the ensemble is the naqare, which is two small kettle drums. These instruments will also work like part of the military ensemble as well, but they were also used in domestic settings like this one. Play both with So this is one of the instruments, like many others, through cultural exchange, got introduced to Europe. And here you see a depiction of it in Boethius. And it got introduced through the Mehter ensemble, which was a military ensemble for the Ottomans. And we don't have images of Mehter ensemble, but Persians also had it. So you can see it here. I tried to zoom in as much as I could, but yeah, you can see it here in this corner, and these are the instruments here. Okay. As As demonstrated throughout this presentation, this ensemble, while specific to Aleppo, became not just a symbol of Ottoman musical identity, but also a living archive of an intercultural exchange, one that continues to resonate today. The final clip of this presentation illustrates the continuity and connection among the musical traditions in this region. It is a concert at Konya, Turkey, in celebration of Mevlana, bringing together musicians from Turkish, Azerbaijani, and Iranian musical traditions. There are a lot of instruments in this video that we haven't discussed, but there are a couple that we have, so I hope you can identify them when you see the video. So neden or çera means why. That's the sanskrit.
ای بگرفته از وفا گوش کران چرا ای کیان به حایله گوش کران ندن بر من خسته کرده ای روی گران چرا من yazığa qaş qabağım oldu giran nədən مرد من که جای توست کارگه وفای توست هر نفسی همی زنی زخم سنان چرا
There's never a good place to stop, so I'm just gonna stop there. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. We'll have a few minutes to go down and look at our exhibit downstairs in the Bell Gallery. And then next week, there'll also be a poster exhibit in the Bell Room on the music specifically of the Khoikhoi, who are the indigenous people of Southern Africa. So come back whenever you have a chance.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Yeah. I think we have time maybe for one or two questions. Are the mics? I'm gonna take the mic around. Yeah. All right, so audience, does anyone have a question for one of our presenters? Yes, oh, over here. Hang on, we're going to bring a mic around to you there.
That last clip, what dates, what times would that have been common to hear walking around in the city?
This?
Yeah,
Oh,
yes, that one right there, with those
So-
instruments and the singing and so forth.
So these are the instruments are, but you wouldn't. The problem is that you wouldn't hear these instruments randomly in the streets. Now, now there might be some people that would play it, like this is a tar. This is a Persian tar. That might sit in the street and play, but this is not something that you will just come across. It's like traditional Persian and Turkish music. You go and watch it being performed. Am I not getting your question? So this particular,
No, I don't mean to belabor, I was just curious as to the form of this, it's very different than all the other instruments and presentations. The style of it,
Oh, so this particular event is a Sufi event, and the musicians, it's not that like if I play any other vocal piece, this would be how it would be. So this is the structure of vocal pieces mostly, and for the instrumentals. The ones that I chose were mostly solos, so you don't have this interaction between the instruments, and the type of the way that the structure of a vocal pieces is very different from an instrumental piece in Persian music, at least. Like we have different melodic structures for it. If that answer your question, we can talk more about it.
Any other questions from the audience in the room, or Toby? I don't know if we had any questions from anybody online. Okay, no one had a question. All right. Well, thanks for your attention. Good news. While the presentations were happening, one of the staff offered to give a tour to anyone who's interested. So, you know, you have to be flexible in life. So thank you so much. Lisa von Bracek from the Children's Literature Research Collections is offering to give a tour. Lisa's a wonderful storyteller. So I suggest that you accompany her if you're interested in seeing our underground storage facility. You can just meet Lisa right over there. A couple of the presenters already called out the exhibits, but I want to list them again for you. Down on the ground floor, literally right underneath our feet, in the Bell Gallery inside the Wallen Center, the resonating power of music in the pre-modern world. Out here in the main gallery, right behind us, the Circle Unbroken, celebrating 40 years of community stewardship and the Gibbons collection. And then if you cross the atrium and take the public elevator up to the second and the third floor, you will see beyond the page, preserving the spirit of the university through an independent student press. And then join us again, please, on December 5th for presentations from the University of Minnesota Archives and the Social Welfare History Archives. Thank you so much.